Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping back in time to the 11th century, deep inside a small monastery, tucked away in a quiet corner of Europe. Imagine yourself waking up in a humble wooden hut, where the air is thick with the warm scent of freshly harvested oats and the faint, comforting trace of burning wood from the hearth. The soft morning light filters through the narrow window, casting gentle shadows over the rough stone floor. You stretch and rise, your fingers still a little stiff from yesterday's lesson in numbers. Now, you are not just any kid, you're a student. One of the few privileged souls here who has begun to explore the mysterious language of the universe. Mathematics. But back then, in the heart of the Middle Ages, math wasn't the friendly subject you might think of today. It was a secret art, a coded system whispered about in the cloisters, often misunderstood and sometimes feared. To many, it was less about numbers and more about magic or divine signs. You pick up a wooden tablet stained with black soot from the inky mixture you made yourself, a mix of water and charred wood, your only ink. Your fingers trace the rough edges of the carved symbols. They look foreign, half-remembered, Roman numerals that you learned, but also strange, new marks that hint at something different. The monks around you whisper tales of wondrous numbers coming from faraway lands, symbols that include the elusive zero. This number, so simple and empty, is said to be a powerful key to understanding the world. But where did it come from? What secrets does it hold? You can almost hear the creak of the monastery's wooden doors as the day begins. Outside, the birds chirp softly in the garden, mingling with the distant murmur of the marketplace in the nearby town. The air smells faintly of damp earth and blooming herbs, grounding you in this very moment, even as your mind drifts toward the vast expanse of numbers and equations that seem almost magical. Here begins your journey, a tale of how, even when the world around you feels dark and still, mathematics quietly grew. From the fading echoes of Roman numerals to the first whispers of algebraic mysteries, numbers slowly carved their path through the shadows of the Middle Ages. Hidden in monasteries and bazaars alike, these numbers weren't just marks on tablets. They were the foundation stones of knowledge, building towards something far greater. And yet, just as you feel you are beginning to understand this secret language, you overhear a conversation. A fellow monk speaks in hushed tones about zero, the empty number that changes everything. It's said to be revolutionary, even dangerous. But the question lingers in the air, unresolved and tantalizing. Where exactly did this zero come from? And how did it slip into the world of numbers unnoticed? Before you can answer, the bell tolls, signaling the start of morning prayers. Your heart pounds with curiosity and a touch of uncertainty. The journey ahead promises to challenge everything you thought you knew. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let your mind wander gently through the halls of time. Tonight, we discover the hidden story of zero and the silent rise of medieval mathematics. Welcome to a world where numbers tell tales, some whispered, some bold, and where every symbol holds a secret waiting for you. You sit down at a massive oak table in a small monastery room, where the air is filled with the smell of parchment and warm candle wax, softly flickering in the dim light. Your mentor, a grey-haired monk with thin glasses on his nose, slowly pulls out a scroll with mysterious symbols, numbers that look completely different from the Roman numerals you are used to. He calls them Arabic numerals, and tells you that these symbols came from distant lands, crossing deserts and seas to get here, to the very center of Europe. You try to concentrate and understand, Why do these strange new symbols cause such distrust and even fear among many of your fellow monks? After all, you are used to numbers written as 1, 5, or 10, stable, familiar. But the number 0, this little void, seems alien to you, almost unacceptable. How can emptiness become a number? And why is it feared more than some wild animals? As you draw these strange symbols on a wooden board, your fingers feel the rough texture of the surface, and the sounds of the monastery buzz quietly in your ears. The rustling of pages, a slight cough, the ringing of a bell in the distance. You notice that the conversations around you increasingly revolve around these very numbers. Some consider them a gift of knowledge, others heresy capable of undermining the foundations of society. Rumor has it that people who dared to use these new numbers were persecuted, accused of witchcraft, and even exiled. These numbers are like magic, not only simplifying calculations, but also changing the course of history itself. They allow you to count faster, write down large numbers, and even solve problems that seemed impossible. But with this comes tension between the old and the new, tradition and progress, faith and science. You can imagine how merchants in the markets of Spain and Italy cautiously use these symbols, while monks in quiet monasteries argue about whether to accept or reject them. You feel the gaze of your old mentor upon you as he whispers quietly, "Accept knowledge, but remember the risks." And at that moment, a question arises in your mind that will haunt you for a long time. What happened to those who dared to accept these new numbers? Why were they sometimes accused of witchcraft? How could mathematics become a cause for fear and persecution? With these thoughts in your mind, you sink into silence, and the soft light of the candles begins to fade. Behind the door, you hear the monk's footsteps receding. It's time to prepare for evening prayers, but the mystery of Arabic numerals is far from solved. The whisper of parchment is the first thing you hear. A dry, soft rustle, as if the pages themselves are breathing. You're seated in the farthest alcove of the monastery library, where the candlelight trembles against stone walls and dust motes drift like tiny, watchful spirits. Around you, the scent of old vellum blends with melted beeswax and a hint of damp from the nearby cloister garden. It's quiet here, sacred, yes, but also heavy. Heavy with secrets. Your fingers trace the margin of a newly arrived manuscript, its ink still sharp, its script tighter and more angular than the gentle Latin of the Psalms. This is not scripture. It is something else. You glance over your shoulder, even though you know no one else should be watching. This text, it's in Arabic, translated awkwardly into Latin by candle-blind scribes in Toledo. It's filled with numbers and patterns, equations unlike anything you were taught in your catechism. And yet, here you are, a monk in woolen robes, with a vow of obedience, clutching a text that speaks in a language older than the walls around you. You didn't ask for this. You were meant to copy psalters, to sing the divine office, to pray. And yet, the numbers pull at you. The way they move, the way they explain things, the way they make the stars feel closer. As if God's breath had left behind a signature in numerical code, hidden in the spiral of a shell or the arc of a sunrise. You remember the first time you questioned a verse from Genesis, not in disbelief, but in curiosity. 6 days, it said, but what if time itself bends differently in the heavens? You whispered the question once quietly to an elder brother in the scriptorium. He said nothing, just made the sign of the cross and did not look at you again. Now you sit alone. The wax from your candle pools in a shallow dish. Your hands tremble not from cold, but from the pull between two worlds, one of unquestioned dogma and one of unfolding discovery. You read about Al-Khwarizmi and his strange ways of solving problems, about ratios that seem to speak in prophecy. The Abbey calls these texts useful for trade, but you feel the danger beneath that usefulness. They're not just tools, they are revelations. You hear a footstep echo down the hallway, measured, deliberate. Brother Joachim, he always walks like that. You slide the manuscript beneath your desk, quickly grab a psalm. He nods as he passes but doesn't speak. Still, the weight of suspicion lingers in the air long after he's gone. You exhale slowly. The candle flickers, casting a trembling halo around the edges of your vision. You're not the only monk to feel this way. Others in Bologna, in Paris, even in distant Oxford, have begun to think differently, to look for God not only in the scriptures, but in symmetry, proportion, balance. Perhaps you tell yourself, numbers are not a threat to faith. Perhaps they are its echo. But then you see it, a single line scribbled in a margin by some unknown hand. Caeli numerantur. The heavens are counted. That's when it hits you. What if there is a pattern to everything? Not just a divine will, but a divine structure. A formula that links the fall of a leaf to the orbit of the moon. Your heart races. The room spins slightly, and you grip the edge of the desk. You stay like that for some time, until the candle burns low, until your back aches, until the bells call you to vespers. You walk the cloisters slowly, eyes lowered. Your brothers chant as though nothing has changed, but inside you something has. You can't unknow what you've seen, and that's when you stumble upon it. In a scroll bound in red twine, beneath an unused lectern in the back of the library, hidden under layers of dust and neglect, an equation. Not a prayer, not a hymn, a sequence, a curve, a formula that, if true, might reshape everything you believe about the order of heaven and earth. It's written in precise hand, guarded by riddles, framed in ancient commentary. But before you can study it fully, a shadow stretches across the floor behind you. You freeze. Someone else knows you found it. Who is it? And more importantly, why do they want you to stop? You don't dare turn around at first. The shadow behind you lingers, motionless, then slowly recedes. Only when you hear the faint creak of a closing door do you release the breath you've been holding. Your heart slows, but only slightly. Someone saw what you found. Someone knows. The next morning arrives draped in fog, cool and damp. You step into the monastery's outer courtyard, where the scent of wet earth and freshly cut grass clings to your robe. The stone beneath your feet is slick, darkened by dew, and your sandals make soft slapping sounds as you walk. There's a quiet rustle in the air, not just from the garden's trembling leaves, but from the thoughts gathering in your mind like clouds about to break. Your teacher waits beneath the open cloister arch. He nods, gestures to a wooden board covered in charcoal marks, curves, angles, numbers. This is not prayer. This is something else, a new kind of language, one that promises to measure the invisible and tame the unpredictable. You kneel beside him and listen. Today's lesson is no longer about counting sheep or sacks of grain. It's about space, real and imagined, about relationships between sides and angles, the flow of forms across invisible lines. He speaks of algebra, a strange term whispered with reverence, meaning reunion of broken parts, and of a man from the city of Baghdad, a scholar named Al-Khwarizmi, whose mind seemed to reach out across continents. The numbers, you are told, came from India. The thinking came from Persia. But it was in the Muslim world where these ideas were nurtured, cultivated like rare herbs in shaded courtyards. Translated texts of Euclid, Ptolemy, and even Archimedes found shelter in Arabic, while Europe clung to its scrolls of worn-out arithmetic. Through Spain and Sicily, through merchants and Moorish scholars, these ideas slipped into the Latin West like lanterns into a darkened room. You watch as your teacher draws an equation with smooth, confident lines. He doesn't speak of God, but of balance, not of miracles, but of patterns. A problem with two unknowns. Solve for one, then the other. You try to follow, though the logic swims like minnows through your thoughts, quick and darting. Still, something inside you stirs. It's not just numbers anymore. It's structure, possibility, a new way to think. You glance around the courtyard. The bellflowers lean heavy with moisture. A pair of doves coo from the eaves. No one else is watching, yet you can't shake the memory of that shadow in the library. Whoever it was, they didn't speak, but their silence rang louder than any accusation. You wonder, if you push too far, too fast, will someone decide it's too dangerous? Your teacher clears his throat. He holds out a wax tablet, gestures for you to try. You take the stylus with steady fingers. The wax is cool to the touch, a thin skin of resistance beneath your hand. You draw a line, then a symbol. Then you stop. You stare at the curve. It's wrong. He corrects you gently, adjusts the angle. There. Now it flows. As the morning drips onward, so do the equations. Parabolas, ratios, proportional reasoning. You learn that algebra isn't just about unknown numbers. It's about finding what's hidden, reshaping what's broken. You start to realize that geometry isn't just shapes on a board, but the very frame of the world. Cathedrals, roads, archways, the very monastery itself. Every stone obeys rules older than language. And yet, there's tension in the lesson, a hesitation behind the words. Your teacher doesn't quote Al-Khwarizmi by name. He doesn't speak of Baghdad. The ideas come cloaked in Latin analogues, simplified, translated, softened. You suspect he fears what full acknowledgement might bring. You remember a comment whispered between novices last week, that these new ideas are foreign, dangerous, perhaps even unclean. Not all knowledge, it seems, is welcome here. You think again of the scroll, the formula hidden beneath red twine, and how quickly curiosity becomes suspicion in a place like this. Your thoughts drift as you finish your final equation. The tablet rests warm from your hand. The sun begins to burn away the fog, leaving behind a courtyard painted in gold. You feel both satisfied and unsettled. You've glimpsed something vast, something that stretches far beyond the monastery walls. But why, you wonder, do so many in Europe still cling so tightly to old arithmetic, refusing the clarity of algebra and the elegance of geometry? Why do some label these ideas unchristian, even heretical, when they reveal the very structure of creation? And perhaps more urgently, what happens to a mind once it has seen too much to forget? Because now that you've begun to see the world through equations and lines, you can't go back. But the question lingers in your mind, coiling tighter with each breath. If these ideas are so powerful, why are they still feared? Maybe the reason numbers are feared, you think, is because they don't lie. Unlike words, which can twist with intention, or doctrine, which bends to authority, a number always returns the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable, even when it threatens power. You carry that thought with you as you pass beyond the monastery's stone gate and into the pulse of the village market. The air hits you like a wave, warm, layered with the smells of sweat, smoke, and sweet bread. You hear shouting before you see faces, bartering voices, clinking coins, the occasional bray of a donkey protesting its burden. Sunlight streaks through the canvas awnings, painting everything in patches of gold and shadow. Your feet kick up dust as you walk, the texture of grit slipping into your sandals. You pause beside a fish vendor, her hands slick with scales and salt water. She's arguing with a customer over the weight of an eel. A scale sits between them, rudimentary and rusted. She places a small stone on one side, then adds more until it balances. She doesn't know the formula for ratios, but she uses it every single day. Further down, a spice merchant fans his wares with a folded scrap of parchment. His fingers move quickly over a tablet made of hardened clay, marked with notches and symbols. Tally marks. He adds with his thumb, subtracts with his pinky. His rhythm is steady, practiced. There's no abstraction here, just survival. A miscount isn't a bad grade. It's a bad week. You stop in front of a cooper's stall, where barrels line the walkway like sleeping animals. The cooper, a man with sawdust in his beard and a permanent stoop, carves a circle into a lid. He mutters measurements under his breath, finger widths, knuckle lengths. You watch as he applies geometry without speaking the word. His compass is a length of twine. His perfection comes not from theory, but from repetition. And yet, the math is there, unspoken, embedded. You duck into a shaded alcove where a boy no older than you holds a wax tablet, squinting as he copies from a book propped open on a crate. It's not a Bible. It's an abacus manual, translated poorly from Italian. Reckoning for Merchants, the title reads, smudged with thumbprints. Inside, multiplication tricks, currency conversions, how to compute interest over weeks, months, seasons. You feel a flicker of recognition. Here's the same algebra you studied, stripped of prestige, offered as tool instead of treasure. Your hands itch to turn the page. The ink is faded, but legible. A chart shows how to quickly divide by 7. You wonder who wrote this. Not a monk, surely. Perhaps a trader from Pisa. Maybe someone who never prayed a day in Latin but still understood the symmetry of commerce. Around you, the market moves in beats and pulses. A baker adjusts the position of her loaves so the sun hits them just right. A tailor uses knotted cord to measure a man's waist. You realize mathematics isn't just in books or lectures. It's in every gesture, every trade, every deal struck between calloused hands. As you wander, you spot a slate nailed to a post near the tavern. It lists debts, names, amounts owed, crude calculations. Someone used chalk to cross out one total and replace it with another. Interest, you assume. Or maybe a rounding error. Or maybe something worse. You step closer. Some names are scratched out entirely. Forgiven, forgotten, or punished? You pass a booth selling candles. Beeswax mostly. The vendor, a round man with a cheery nose, is arguing with a customer. 5 dozen is 60, he insists. No, the customer snaps. It's 72. The vendor hesitates, narrows his eyes. You're thinking of a baker's dozen. They bicker, voices rising. The crowd laughs. But beneath it, you hear the tension, the stakes. For them, numbers are not theories. They're tools, weapons, sometimes even traps. You remember your teacher's words from days ago. The world can be measured. And once you measure it, you can change it. That's the secret hiding beneath this chaos. That's the danger. It's not that numbers are foreign. It's that they grant power to those who learn them. As the sun begins to lower and shadows stretch across cobbled lanes, you pause by a cloth merchant counting bolts of linen. His lips move silently, his brow furrowed. You notice a page tucked beside him, creased and marked in red ink. It's a table of conversions, ells to yards, florins to deniers, weight to volume. Your breath catches. The handwriting looks familiar. You lean closer. It's the same notation as the manuscript you studied in the library. But what is this doing here? How did monastery knowledge end up in the hands of a market vendor? And more importantly, who else might be passing it around? You recognize the handwriting instantly. The red inked numerals on the merchant's parchment match the careful notation you studied in the monastery. They shouldn't be here. Not in the dirt of the marketplace, not tucked between bolts of linen. And yet, here they are. Whispered knowledge, passed hand to hand, drifting like incense through a world that pretends it doesn't breathe it. Later that evening, you step beneath the heavy archway of the chapel. The door groans closed behind you. The world narrows. The noise of the village fades, replaced by the faint hum of silence. You inhale deeply. The scent is unmistakable. Frankincense and centuries-old wood, mingled with the faint sweetness of melted beeswax. Candles line the nave, their flames swaying like quiet souls, and the shadows they cast stretch long and solemn. You walk slowly between the pews. On either side, carved into the stone columns, are symbols. Triangles, spirals, stars, loops. Some are decorative. Others you now realize are not. Your fingertips trace the grooves. Not random. Not just artistry. These are numbers. Hidden, yes, but present. 7 stars for creation, 12 knots for apostles, 3 arcs for the Trinity. At the altar, an elderly monk kneels in prayer. You recognize him. Brother Hieronymus. His spine bows like an old oak, and his whispering voice echoes in Latin rhythm. As he rises, he notices you and gestures gently for you to approach. His eyes are kind, but ancient. You see the symbols, don't you? He says quietly. You nod. Then you're ready. He leads you to a side chapel, smaller, colder. The air thickens here. Dust floats visibly in the candlelight, as if the space itself remembers every breath ever spoken within it. On the wall, a mosaic, faded and crumbling. You see it now with new eyes. Rows of numbers, golden tesserae arranged in curious sequences. Fibonacci spirals, ratios, sacred geometry, hidden in plain sight. Hieronymus speaks slowly. Long before our churches rose from the soil, the ancients saw divinity in pattern. Pythagoras called numbers the music of the spheres. Neoplatonists believed that creation flowed outward in perfect ratios. Geometry was a hymn written by God's own hand. He places a scroll before you, bound in leather, edges brittle. Inside, diagrams, annotations, equations paired with verses, psalms side by side with proportions. The golden ratio sketched alongside Genesis. It's not blasphemy, you realize. It's reverence through logic. You read that 3 is not merely a number, but the heartbeat of the divine, past, present, future, Father, Son, Spirit. 7 is not just days of the week, it's completion. 12 governs apostles, tribes, and lunar cycles. 33, the age of crucifixion. 40, days of flood, exile, fasting. Numbers wrap around faith like thread through cloth. And yet, not everyone sees it that way. You're shown a codex, burned at the edges. The hand of the scribe stops midway through a page, interrupted. He tried to calculate the dimensions of heaven, Hieronymus whispers, and they called it heresy. You run your hand across the charred vellum. The ink flakes off like ash. Not all monks agree with Brother Hieronymus. Many fear this fusion of reason and revelation, logic and liturgy. The church survives through mystery, they say. Numbers strip away mystery, but Hieronymus argues otherwise. Numbers don't dismantle God. They describe his fingerprints. You're given a task. Copy the scroll. Not for the library, for safekeeping. If one day they burn it, he says, let there be another. You begin that night. By candlelight, the ink shines like oil. The feather of your quill scratches in a rhythm that feels familiar, sacred. Each line drawn, each symbol repeated, becomes a quiet form of prayer. You lose track of time. Your breath falls in sync with your strokes, your thoughts quiet. In this stillness, numbers do not feel cold. They feel warm, radiant, as if understanding them brings you a step closer to understanding why the world is shaped as it is, why it spins, why it ends, why it begins again. But as the candle flickers, you glance toward the hallway. A younger monk stands there, watching, not speaking. His face is unreadable. Will he join you, or will he report you? And what happens if someone tries to reveal the full secret buried within these sacred numbers? Secrets not meant for every eye. He didn't speak. He simply turned and walked away. No nod, no accusation. Just a slow, deliberate step into the shadows beyond the chapel. You stayed frozen, fingers still resting on the scroll, breath caught somewhere between relief and dread. Did he understand what he saw? Or was he walking straight to the prior? The question lingers in your mind long after sunrise, as you journey far beyond the monastery walls, across fields and river valleys, past towns and toll gates, until one day, weeks or months later, you arrive at a city unlike any you've known. A city where learning doesn't hide behind altar screens, but blossoms in the open. Bologna. The moment you step into the courtyard of the university, everything shifts. The smell alone disorients you. Ink mixed with sweat, fresh plaster, dried herbs, and a tang of iron from tools scattered beside the apothecary's bench. You pass under soaring arches, walls darkened by centuries of chalk dust and candle soot. Everywhere you look, students are arguing, loudly, passionately. To your left, a circle debates the nature of infinity. To your right, a man nearly topples a wooden bench in his excitement over Euclid. The accents are from all corners of Europe. The robes are patched, but eyes are bright, hungry. These are not monks. These are scholars, and they wear their learning like armor. You join a small group seated on the steps of a lecture hall. The stone is warm beneath you. One student passes around a page copied from Fibonacci's Liber Abaci, the book of the abacus, written less than a century ago, but already reshaping trade and science. Another sketches parabolas into a dusty slate, trying to explain projectile motion with more fervor than success. Then the bell rings. Everyone rises. You follow the tide into a vaulted room, where the light filters through small, grimy windows. At the front, a master in a crimson robe begins to speak, not in Latin prayer, but in reasoned argument. His voice is measured, his gestures sharp. Today's lecture is on ratio and proportion. Tomorrow's will be on the movement of heavenly bodies. He quotes not only the Bible, but also Al-Kindi, Euclid, and Al-Tusi. He uses a pointer carved with spiral markings to indicate curves drawn on parchment the size of a small door. You sit on a creaking bench, eyes wide. Here, mathematics is not hidden. It is central, not feared, but questioned, not whispered, but shouted. And yet, not all is free. You hear rumors in the taverns at night of professors exiled for heretical conclusions, of lectures shut down for questioning too much. Some say that only theology holds real authority. Others murmur about rivalries between faculties, about knowledge becoming currency, and influence outweighing truth. Still, you feel alive. You hold your stylus differently now. You write with purpose, not caution. You copy diagrams with care, not fear. You begin to understand that geometry can build not only churches, but bridges, that algebra can model not only trade, but time. You start reading treatises in Arabic, with Latin glosses scrawled in the margins. You even attend disputations, public debates where students challenge professors before entire halls. One evening, under a deep blue sky dusted with stars, you sit in the university courtyard surrounded by murmuring voices and flickering lamplight. A Greek scholar recites fragments from Pythagoras, while a Jewish student from Toledo explains numerical patterns in sacred texts. You pass a sheet between you, marking it with numbers that echo the rhythms of music and architecture alike. And it hits you. This is no longer about secrets. This is about synthesis. The world is changing. The dark corridors of monasteries have begun to open, and the torch of knowledge passes from hand to hand, illuminating not just faith or trade or mysticism, but life itself. Still, tensions simmer. One morning, a poster appears nailed to the university gate. It denounces a professor by name, accusing him of corrupting youth with foreign methods. His lectures are suspended, his students threatened. You ask around. Some say it was the work of rival scholars. Others suspect the church, or perhaps someone afraid of what truth might look like when it no longer fits into neat doctrine. You return to your chamber, close the shutters, and unroll your own notes. Equations, ratios, translations. You've come too far to turn away now. But as you scan the parchment, you find a line you didn't write, a correction. Precise, firm in handwriting you don't recognize. Someone's been reading your work. The ink is fresh. So now you wonder, who's watching you in this university where knowledge grows so boldly, yet shadows still stretch so far? The handwriting didn't match anyone you knew. It wasn't a professor's, nor a student's. Neat, practiced, exacting. Someone who knew numbers but preferred silence. You checked your notes 3 more times. No additional marks, just that one correction, like a whisper across the page. Check your assumption about declination. It lingered in your mind as you climbed the hill beyond the university walls, just past the last stone outcroppings where the lights of the city flickered like embers. Up here, under the open sky, it was quiet enough to hear your breath. And the stars. They weren't just overhead. They surrounded you, cold, unmoving, infinite. You draw your cloak tighter. The wind brushes your cheeks, dry and biting, smelling faintly of burnt olive wood from distant hearths. You sit on a weather-worn stone bench, an armillary sphere beside you, its brass arcs already slick with dew. Your fingers move over the rings, aligning them slowly. You've done this before, but tonight something feels different. In the monastery, the stars were symbols, markers for feast days, tools for calculating Easter. In the university, they were theories, governed by spherical trigonometry and heavenly spheres. But here, under the real sky, they feel like questions. You open your notebook. On the parchment, tables, observations, calculations you made earlier that week, using methods first traced by Islamic scholars. Al-Battani's refinements of Ptolemy, the corrections from the Marageh Observatory in Persia. The moon's phases, the solar elongation, the retrograde motion of Mars. Almanac's whisper of orbits before the word had meaning. Ratios suggest harmony between the celestial and terrestrial. You remember a line your professor muttered once, almost in passing. The heavens obey laws we're only beginning to guess. You didn't know what he meant then. You might now. Behind you, another student paces, measuring angles with an astrolabe. You can hear the soft clink of brass against leather, the sharp inhale as he scribbles a correction. Others speak in murmurs. A collective hush falls whenever a shooting star slices across the night like a whispered omen. You sketch a chart. Time versus art. Your candle flickers, but you manage. You calculate sidereal time. Try to align it with your observations. The numbers almost match, but not quite. You hesitate. Is it error, or is it something else? A nearby scholar from Toledo shares his own sheet with you. His numbers are better, cleaner, but he uses a different model. One from the Alphonsine tables, composed in Castile by a team of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars. You trade notes in silence, no pride, just awe. You pause. Your breath fogs in the air. Above you, Orion stands as still as ever, the 3 stars of his belt perfectly aligned. And suddenly, the math becomes tangible. The universe doesn't just exist. It moves, it obeys, it follows rhythm, ratio, law. But the law is not always precise. Your fingers tremble as you recheck a calculation. A small mistake, just a fraction of a degree. But it shifts your entire projection. An eclipse, forecast for a feast day, would instead fall days earlier. If followed, the error would misalign the calendar for years. Pilgrimages would be launched on the wrong moons. Fasts broken too soon. Prayers mistimed. You realize then, the stars may be constant, but your measurements are not. And if the stars guide not just navigation, but liturgy, finance, and faith itself, then what happens when your numbers lie? You think of past scholars, Johannes de Sacrobosco, whose De Sphæra Mundi tried to explain the cosmos in terms a monk could grasp, or Gerard of Cremona, who translated Arabic ephemerides into Latin so others could read the skies. Their work shaped calendars, prayers, even kings' decisions. You stare up again. Do you trust your chart? A sudden gust sends your notes skittering across the grass. You scramble after them, catching pages before the ink smears. One sheet flutters toward the edge of the ridge. You grab it, barely. On the back, in that same strange handwriting, another note appears. Your tables assume a perfect circle. What if the path is an ellipse? You freeze. An ellipse? The idea scratches at the back of your mind. Not a circle. Not perfect, but stretched. Imperfect. The implications spin through you. If the heavens move elliptically, then every model you've ever used is flawed. And if that's true, what else have you calculated wrong? What if the stars don't mislead you? What if your own assumptions do? It wasn't the stars that misled you. It was your assumption. The quiet belief in the perfection of the circle, passed down from Ptolemy and sacred to so many who came before. But now, with the word ellipse echoing in your thoughts, you begin to understand. The universe might run not on divine symmetry, but on practical imperfection. And if the heavens curve like stretched cloth, what about the earth beneath your feet? You descend from the hillside, your breath still fogging in the chill morning air. The light is grey, not yet full dawn, and a different rhythm takes hold. Hammer on iron, saws biting wood, chains creaking against pulleys. You follow the sound to its source. A workshop carved into the side of a riverbank, half stone, half timber, where firelight flickers behind oiled parchment windows. You step inside. At once, your senses flood. The scent of pine pitch and lamp oil clings to the rafters. A smear of soot marks the floor where coals have been dragged. You hear the hiss of quenching metal, the grind of gears tested by calloused fingers. This isn't a place of theory. It's a place of execution. A wheel leans against the far wall, half assembled. Its spokes are hand-planed, its rim measured and remeasured by a man with ink-stained sleeves. He doesn't look up as you enter. He's counting rotations, whispering numbers under his breath. A brass weight dangles from twine, swinging like a pendulum. You know that rhythm now. It's calculation. Physical, grounded and exact. He points to a chart pinned beside his bench. Ratios 3:1, 7:2, 11:1, 3. Markings to guide cog teeth and axle length. You recognize some from your studies. Others are new, born not from books, but from necessity. The mechanic adjusts a copper rod with a mallet, then motions for you to help. You grip the end of the beam. It's heavier than expected, warm from the forge, smooth but slightly bowed. Together, you set it into place. Measure twice, he mutters, or the whole thing binds. You nod. It's a mantra now. You move through the shop. A younger apprentice smooths a wooden shaft using a caliper to check width. His brow is furrowed with focus. On a raised table, you see sketches, simple but elegant. A water wheel, a gear train, something that might become a clock, not for hours, for seasons. The master leans over your shoulder. You've seen this before, he asks. You nod. Only in drawings. He smiles, a half-smile lined with soot. Then you haven't really seen it. He walks you through the pieces. How the shape of the tooth determines the smoothness of rotation. How water flow must be regulated by angles and descent. How pressure can warp a structure if not distributed across a span. Every part depends on proportion. Every motion begins with a number. You glance at a set of scrolls tucked beside the tool wall. Diagrams of lifting cranes, siphons and catapults. One bears the name of Hero of Alexandria, Heron, the ancient inventor whose works had survived the ages in Arabic manuscripts. The mechanic doesn't read Greek, he reads results. The room quiets as a test begins. The new water wheel is lowered into the stream outside. A channel diverts water toward the blades. Slowly, then with confidence, the wheel turns. You hear the splash of rhythm. The crank moves. A platform rises, and just as quickly, stalls. The wheel shudders. The axle binds. The crank reverses. A shout. Apprentices scatter to shut the gate. You run to the lever, but the chain has slipped its gear. The platform lurches, catches, then jerks sideways. Something splinters. The mechanism stops. Steam from the river curls around your feet, quiet and unimpressed. The master kneels beside the gear and squints at the brake. We miscalculated, he says. Not in anger, not in shame. Just fact. You kneel beside him. The brake isn't from force. It's from stress. Tension accumulated over time. A slight misalignment, less than half a degree. And yet, everything depended on it. You sit back, breath catching. You think of the stars, of the ellipse. You think of churches built on domes, mills that grind grain for villages, aqueducts that bring water to cities, all dependent on math, all fragile in their own way. You look up. The clouds are gathering. The air smells of iron and damp straw. If one mistake could crack a machine, what might it do to something larger? You glance again at the scrolls. There's one diagram you don't recognize. A sphere balanced inside a box, suspended by lines. It's labeled simply astrolabe of balance, and beneath a single sentence, used to predict the movement of water and stars alike. You feel the hairs rise on your neck. What was this tool? And who first built it, if not the ancients? You turn the scroll slowly in your hands. The diagram labeled astrolabe of balance is unlike anything you've studied. A sphere suspended by threads, its center marked not with time or latitude, but with measurements you don't fully recognize. Fractions, angles, volumes. Beside the image, notes in Latin and Arabic intertwine, discussing humeral equilibrium and bodily flux. The deeper you read, the clearer it becomes. This isn't a tool for stars. It's a tool for healing. The next day, you step into a physician's chamber. The air changes immediately. It is heavy with the scent of dried rosemary and crushed fennel, beeswax salves and old parchment. A fire crackles in the corner beneath a small bronze cauldron. The walls are lined with shelves, and the shelves are lined with glass jars, some full of powdered roots, others with oily infusions that shimmer amber in the morning light. You sit on a three-legged stool. The wood creaks, but you remain still. In front of you, a table covered in scrolls and folded charts, marked with strange ratios and circles drawn in overlapping layers. Next to them, a scale, not one for merchants, but for medicine. Delicate, precise. You can hear it shift with the weight of a feather. The physician, a man well into his 50s, greets you not with blessing, but with calculation. Your pulse, he says, is stronger in the morning. That tells me your choler is rising. You blink. He doesn't look up. Instead, he dips a reed pen into ink and begins sketching a table. Columns for humor, season, moon phase, and temperament. He is mapping you. As he speaks, he measures a tincture in a graduated glass. Each drop counts. He adds wormwood extract, then tempering it with mint. He checks your weight on a counterpoise scale, calculates a dose. Every action is ruled by numbers, not guesses. 1 gram too much, he mutters, and the bile overflows. 1 too little, and the phlegm settles in your lungs. You watch him grind a red root in a mortar, counting each circular turn of the pestle. 12, 15, 18. Then he stops. That's enough. He adds hot wine to dissolve the powder, then measures the mixture against a line etched on a copper spoon. The liquid glows faintly in the light. Drink slowly, he says. Let it settle into the stomach. You sip. The flavor is bitter, almost sour, but warm. He watches you the way an architect might watch a dome settle into its base. Later, he shows you his charts. One depicts planetary alignments. Another tracks temperature fluctuations over the course of 3 seasons. Another aligns the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, air, with the 4 humors, black bile, phlegm, yellow bile, and blood. These, he tells you, are not symbols, they are systems. You ask him where he learned this. He names Avicenna, Galen, Constantine the African. Medicine, he says, is a calculation of the body's balance. We do not heal by prayer alone. We heal by proportion. He leads you to a cabinet and opens a drawer of case records. Each one is marked with equations, dosage by body weight, adjusted for season, moon phase, age. You recognize some of the math from your astronomy lessons, mean values, decimal fractions. But here, they're applied not to the heavens, but to lungs and livers and lacerations. He tells you of a colleague who once reversed a fever with nothing but timing, administering a cold draft at moon's descent. Another who accidentally doubled the valerian root in a sleeping potion, causing a patient to sleep for 2 days. A mistake, he says, is not a bruise. It is a breach, a failure in order. As the sun begins to lower, the chamber dims. A girl is carried in by her mother, fevered, trembling, eyes half-lidded. The physician motions you to assist. He examines her tongue, her skin, her breath. He consults his table. Her weight is noted. Her age, the phase of the moon, waning, not full. He begins to mix again. You hold the spoon this time. Your hands are steady, but your mind races. What if the chart is wrong? What if the moon's influence is misunderstood? What if her humors don't conform to the ideal balance? You press your thumb to the side of the cup, feeling the warmth. You glance at the numbers. The dose is tiny. just a few grains difference from too little or too much. The physician nods. Administer it, he says. And for the first time, you ask yourself, what happens when the math doesn't heal, but harms? The girl lived. You return to the chamber the next morning, heart heavy with dread, only to find her sitting upright, sipping broth. Her cheeks had regained colour, and her mother wept with gratitude. The physician said nothing. He simply marked the dosage, the timing, the temperature, and moved on. But you didn't. You kept seeing that delicate moment in your mind. The spoon, the number, the unspoken gamble. Later that week, you find yourself in another kind of chamber altogether, stone-walled, high-ceilinged, lit with narrow slits of morning light. You've come to study a different calculation, not of bodies, but of time. A bell tolls overhead, deep, resonant. Its echo lingers in your bones. You count the strikes. 8. Morning prayers should have begun already, but no one moves. Not yet. All eyes are on the master, seated behind a long wooden table scattered with scrolls, tablets, and astrolabes. He lifts a brass pointer and begins to trace across a circular chart carved into the tabletop. Around it, the months are arranged like petals, each section filled with scribbles, numbers, feast days. This, he says, is not a clock. It is a question. You lean closer. The calendar is wrong. Not in content, but in rhythm. You see it now, the drift, the mismatch between solar truth and sacred date. A slipping of days that no one notices, until suddenly Easter falls too far from spring, or a saint's feast no longer aligns with its appointed star. The master continues. The Julian calendar assumes a year is 365.25 days. It is not. The actual solar year is 365.2422. That difference, 11 minutes and 14 seconds, does not sound like much. But in 4 centuries, it becomes days. He marks a section of the chart. By the 13th century, our equinox arrives days too early. Centuries from now, it will come weeks before its name. The sky will say one thing, the church another. You sit back. This is not just math. It is faith. A monk beside you speaks softly. That is why our computus is sacred. He's referring to the centuries-old calculation that determines the date of Easter. The first Sunday after the first full moon, after the vernal equinox. A simple formula on the surface, but beneath it lies a labyrinth of astronomy, theology, and approximation. Too much approximation. You flip open a parchment. There, meticulously copied, are lunar cycles over decades. Corrections scribbled in margins. Every 19 years, the same moon returns to the same position, more or less. This is the Metonic cycle, borrowed from the ancients and pressed into Christian service. But even it begins to falter over time. You feel the weight of it. If Easter drifts too far from spring, the faithful begin to doubt. If Christmas slips from solstice, traditions fracture. If holy days become guesswork, then what is left to trust? You turn to a second chart, a proposal for reform. It eliminates leap years in centuries not divisible by 400. It corrects the calendar's rhythm. It realigns time with truth. You run your finger along the line dated March 21st, the designated equinox. Gregorian, someone whispers. You blink. The reform isn't yet official, not for years, but already it's brewing in minds across Europe, astronomers in Rome, mathematicians in Salamanca, bishops in quiet rooms like this one, surrounded by candlelight and doubt. You close your eyes. You imagine being a farmer relying on feast days to plant, a sailor trusting stars aligned to named dates, a mother lighting a candle on a saint's evening that no longer matches the heavens? What happens when the calendar misleads not just scholars, but everyone? The master continues, explaining the necessary leap year corrections. You try to follow, but your mind drifts to how a single miscalculation ripples across centuries, how a priest's homily might ring hollow when spoken on the wrong day, how the rhythm of worship might collapse if not carefully guarded by math. Suddenly, time feels fragile. Later, you stand alone in the cathedral courtyard. The paving stones beneath your feet are cold. In the distance, you hear the choir rehearse, voices rising and falling in perfect harmonic proportion. The air carries the scent of wax and stone dust. You look up. The sky is clear. The sun is low. You count the days until the equinox. You check your chart. They do not match. You inhale slowly. What happens when the faithful notice the stars disagree with the church? When spring arrives, and Easter does not? And more troubling still, if time itself is unsteady, what else, once believed eternal, might shift beneath your feet? You've seen how time can bend, how trust in sacred rhythms falters when the stars contradict the saints. But not all battles of the mind unfold under vaulted ceilings or within dusty codices. Some happen in low-lit halls over cups of spiced wine, amidst laughter, murmurs, and quiet wagers. Sometimes the sharpest edge of mathematics comes not in calendars or cures, but in games. Tonight, you find yourself in a chamber unlike any you've studied in. It smells of old wood and beeswax, with a faint trace of parchment dust and baked apples from the kitchen below. The room is warm, the fire low and crackling. Around the table sit 5 men and 1 woman, all of them in robes too stained and patched to be professors, but with eyes too bright to be merely idle. One of them, a wiry man with streaks of chalk on his sleeves, leans over a board carved with rows of symbols. In his hand, a stick of charcoal. "This," he says, "isn't for coin. It's for pride." He draws a shape, then a number, then another. You must arrange 9 numbers, 1 through 9, in a grid of 3 rows. Every row, column, and diagonal must add to 15. A boy beside you mutters, "Ah, again the magic square." You lean forward. The board is simple, but the challenge eternal. You trace the possibilities in your mind. The center must be 5. Odd symmetry, then corners, then flanks. You begin to understand the balance, the ways certain numbers must occupy certain positions, the inevitable patterns hidden in plain sight. Around you, the group shifts from game to game. One offers a riddle. A merchant wants to cross a river with a wolf, a goat, and a cabbage. The room breaks into chuckles before the punchline lands. Another challenge involves measuring exactly 4 liters of wine using only 5 and 3-liter jugs. You remember seeing it in a translated Arab manuscript weeks ago. As the games continue, so does the complexity. One man brings out a scroll, folded many times, the edges frayed. "From Alcuin of York," he declares. "A puzzle about monks and bridges. Solve it in fewer steps, and I'll buy you a drink." You lean closer. The question reads, 3 monks must cross a narrow bridge at night. They have 1 lantern. No more than 2 can cross at once, and they must move at the slower monk's pace. One takes 1 minute, another 2, the third 10. What is the shortest time for all to cross? You begin sketching possibilities in your mind. Send the fastest back and forth. Pair the slowest together. The room leans into your silence. You propose a plan. They nod. You've earned your drink, but not everyone enjoys the ease. In the corner, one man remains silent. His name is Laurentius. Older, heavy-set, with deep-set eyes and hands that twitch when idle. He's presented no riddles, no laughter, just observation, until now. He unrolls a parchment, much cleaner than the rest. On it, a single diagram, a triangle with numbers at each corner. 3 lines radiate from each side. Place numbers 1 through 12 in these blanks, he says, so each side sums to the same total. The group quiets. You try. Quickly at first, then carefully. But the more you test, the more impossible it seems. No configuration works. You try mirroring the triangle, rotating numbers. Still no solution. Frustration creeps into the room like mist. Someone mutters, "It can't be done." Laurentius smiles, slow and tight. Then perhaps you are not ready. The tension sharpens. Another man, younger, slams his cup. "You mock us. There is no solution." Laurentius does not answer. The group fractures. Some leave, muttering. Others stay but grow quiet. You remain. You approach him after the room has cleared. "Was it solvable?" you ask. He hesitates. "Everything is solvable," he says, "if you know what to ask." Then he gathers his scroll and leaves, steps echoing down the stone hall. Days later, you discover that Laurentius has been barred from future gatherings. Not for rudeness, but because his puzzles, they say, cause division, disruption. They are not play. They are provocation. You wonder about that. What happens when a game ceases to be a game? When numbers, meant to sharpen minds, begin to sever bonds? And deeper still, what truth lies inside a question that no one can answer, or dares to? You remember Laurentius's puzzle, not because it stumped you, but because it changed something in the room. The way people looked at one another shifted. Questions were no longer friendly. They were tests, traps. And for the first time, you realized numbers could divide as easily as they united. Tonight, you walk deeper into the heart of that realization. You descend narrow steps, each one damp and uneven. The walls around you slick with condensation and covered in chalky symbols. The air is thick with the scent of sulfur, dried herbs, and scorched leather. At the bottom, a door, unlocked. Inside, the chamber breathes. Candles flicker in copper holders. A furnace glows in the far corner, humming with life. Rows of flasks, alembics, crucibles, and coiled glass tubes fill the space like organs within a body. You step carefully. The floor is warm beneath your boots. You can hear the faint hiss of something volatile simmering. An old man turns toward you. His robe is stained with burns and dusted with powdered charcoal. His beard is long, his fingers inked with formulae. He gestures without speaking. You join him at the table. Laid before you, a triangle inscribed with planetary glyphs, a scroll covered in geometric diagrams, and a set of small brass weights shaped like stars. In the center of it all, a piece of parchment titled Ratio Divina, the divine ratio. Alchemy, he finally says, is a language, but its grammar is mathematics. You don't speak, you only listen. He walks you through the proportions. Mercury to sulfur, 3 to 5. Lead to gold, 7 to 1. He shows you how geometric figures guide the distillation process, how numbers tell the truth of fire. He taps on a glass jar. The philosopher's stone, he murmurs, may be metaphor, but the ratio is real. You take in every detail. The smell of myrrh stirred into vinegar, the texture of calcined bone crushed between 2 stones, the sight of blue flame curling around a copper rod like a serpent recognizing kin. He opens another scroll, this one older, brittle. The ink has faded to rust. It describes how certain numbers, 1, 3, 7, 12, carry divine resonance. Not just symbols, but forces. Tools to align matter with will. He mentions Ramon Lull, who built rotating wheels of logic to reveal divine combinations. You recognize his name. He wasn't just a mystic, he was a mathematician. The alchemist smiles. He places a stone basin before you and pours in a dark liquid that smells of cloves and iron. Stir, he says, 33 times clockwise, then 1 counterclockwise, always these numbers. You do as he says. The mixture glows faintly green. He explains that heat must follow Fibonacci intervals. Warm, wait, warm again, then rest. You nod. You've used those numbers before, but for planting, not for transmutation. He adds a final powder. The mixture smokes. Then he tells you why you're really here. He unrolls the largest scroll. It's a map, not of land, but of transformation. Each process, labeled with equations and star signs. Each element paired with a number. Salt, 4. Sulfur, 5. Mercury, 6. Not arbitrary, derived, ordered. He speaks low. The world is matter. But to change it, you must know its number. You barely hear him. Your eyes are fixed on the last part of the scroll, a warning. If the proportion is broken, the form will rebel. You ask what that means. He doesn't answer. Instead, he lifts a small vial and pours it into the crucible. The mixture bubbles violently. A smell, bitter and metallic, fills the room. You feel your throat tighten. He leans over and mutters, "The balance must be perfect. Otherwise..." A sharp crack. The crucible splits. The mixture spills onto the table. It hisses, eats into the wood. You jump back. He grabs a cloth and smothers it, hands trembling. The flame dies. Silence returns. Smoke curls toward the ceiling. He sits, breathing heavily. You watch him. Finally, he looks at you. His eyes are tired. "We deal in essences," he says. "But numbers are the only truth that will not lie, and even they can be misunderstood." You leave the chamber shaken. Outside, the moon hangs low, and the air is sharp. You wonder, if numbers have the power to transform base metal into gold, what else might they alter? And what happens when someone misuses that power? Not in a lab, but in the world. The alchemist warned you, numbers hold power, but power rarely travels without consequence. That thought echoes now as the wheels beneath your carriage shudder over loose stones, and the canopy above you sways with the wind. You're not alone. A merchant snores beside a crate of cloth dyed with indigo. Opposite him, a monk carefully cradles a scroll case wrapped in oilskin. You've tucked your own manuscript deep within your satchel, tied tight with twine and sealed under layers of linen. The road stretches ahead, cutting through golden fields and patches of cypress. You've long since left your university city behind. Dust clings to your boots. The air smells of dry leaves and livestock. But the real scent, the one that stirs your thoughts, is ink. Not your ink, but the ink of minds you've never met. Men in Samarkand who measured the stars centuries before your birth. Scholars in Cordoba who copied Indian algorithms into Arabic script. Traders from Aleppo who whispered of zero like it was both magic and heresy. You reach into your satchel and pull the cord a little tighter. You remember the market at dawn before you departed. Tents stretched like patchwork across the square. Candied dates and brass lamps. Words in languages you barely recognized. And there, in a corner store, a man had been drawing spirals on parchment, explaining in broken Latin how these shapes predicted the cycles of wind. He'd called it the golden mean. You tried to ask more, but your tongue betrayed you. The merchant only smiled and pressed the parchment into your palm. "You'll understand it," he said, "when your road becomes a circle." Now, jostled by the uneven path, you study the shapes again, Ratios curl across the page like waves in a sea you've never seen. It reminds you of Fibonacci, Leonardo of Pisa, whose father served in North Africa and brought home the numerals that now guide your every calculation. You can still recall the Liber Abaci and how it changed the way merchants and mathematicians alike counted their world. You glance at the monk. His fingers move in rhythm, whispering prayer in a tongue older than your own. On the edge of his scroll case is a faint mark, Syriac script, likely copied from a Greek text translated into Arabic, then Latin, a threefold path, like a labyrinth of tongues. You wonder how many hands the knowledge passed through to reach you, how many names were lost in translation. As the carriage slows to climb a hill, you shift your position and peer outside. To the east, a caravan, camels loaded with folded carpets and bound volumes. Their riders wear layered robes, turbans of indigo. They speak quietly, gesturing toward the road ahead. One carries a long bundle wrapped in green velvet, an astrolabe perhaps, or a quadrant. Instruments as precious as gold, but with no price. To the west, a coastal city unfolds, spires and domes, sails in the harbour, bells calling to prayer and to market. You'll disembark there, share your notes, perhaps argue with a scholar from Alexandria, perhaps teach a boy from Naples how to divide using decimals. But even as the thought warms you, a chill settles in your chest. You remember what happened to a traveller in Provence, accused of sorcery for demonstrating algebra with symbols the villagers could not read, or the woman in Bologna, who calculated a harvest forecast more accurately than any priest. She was exiled, called unnatural. Numbers to some are still devils dressed in ink. You look again at your parchment, spirals, ratios, 0. A carriage guard climbs beside the driver. His eyes scan the horizon, then glance toward you. He squints, too long. You tuck the parchment away. The monk beside you notices. Careful, he whispers. Some don't trust what they can't name. The merchant stirs, yawns, stretches. The carriage lurches forward again. You close your eyes. The road hums beneath you. The wind brushes your face. Somewhere behind you, a fragment of knowledge crossed the border. Somewhere ahead, it may plant a seed. But here, between stations, between languages, you are a vessel, not of faith, not of trade, but of numbers. And vessels are easy to break. You grip your satchel tighter. What happens if someone looks too closely? What if the knowledge you carry, meant to enlighten, becomes cause for suspicion? And if questioned, would you hide what you know, or defend it? You gripped your satchel too tightly that day. The question burned. If what you know invites suspicion, do you stay silent, or do you speak? The answer, it turns out, depends on who is listening, and whether they believe you should be allowed to speak at all. Tonight, you find yourself in a place few are permitted. A stone cloister, its walls soaked with the scent of lavender and smoke. The air is still. The night insects have gone quiet. In the far room of the convent, by the flickering light of an oil lamp, sits a woman hunched over a parchment so dense with symbols. Even your trained eyes need time to adjust. You do not speak. She doesn't yet know you're watching. She dips her pen into ink made of ground walnut husk and resumes writing. The movement is precise, practiced. Equations spill across the page like poetry in a secret tongue. Ratios, geometry, variables labeled in Greek. You step closer. Your boot makes the faintest scuff on the flagstone. She stops. Without looking up, she asks, "How long have you been there?" You hesitate. Long enough to know you're doing something they wouldn't approve of. She sighs. Then you know too much. She sets her pen down. When she turns, You see a face not old, but wearied, not dimmed, but cautious. She does not wear the robes of a scholar. She wears wool, plain and undyed, as all women here do. But on her belt hangs a leather case, thick, heavy, worn at the seams, a mathematician's case. "My name is Isabel," she says. "And before you ask, no, I am not allowed to do this." She gestures to the parchment. "I was trained in Salerno, under Trotula's name. But when she died, the school grew colder. They let us copy texts, never create them. You sit. The stone bench is cold through your cloak." Isabel returns to her page. You ask her why she continues. "Because numbers don't care if you're allowed," she says. She shows you her work, a reimagining of Pythagorean theory applied to garden design, a new way to calculate medicine dosages by weight and season, an improvement on the Galenic ratios still taught by monks. You see elegance in her reasoning, efficiency in her formulas. You see brilliance, and she sees fear. "If they find this," she says, "they'll say I stole it, or that it's witchcraft, or that I was misled by the devil." She laughs, but there's no humor in it. You glance at the window. The moonlight doesn't reach here. It is a room of chosen shadows. Isabel unrolls a second scroll. This one she wrote in cipher. Letters stand in for numbers, numbers for letters. It's slow to decipher, but deliberate. Protection in complexity. She tells you of others. A nun in Rouen, who created symmetrical patterns with perfect numerical balance, said to mirror God's music. A girl in Naples, who calculated shipping weights in her father's warehouse, only to be accused of trickery. A healer near Ghent, who used equations to diagnose illness faster than her male peers, and vanished after being denounced. You ask if they were ever acknowledged. Isabel smiles, only in whispers, and in footnotes, if the man copying the text had mercy. Outside a bell tolls. Midnight. She begins to roll her scrolls again. You realize she will never publish them, never sign her name to them. Her numbers will travel faceless, perhaps altered, perhaps erased. And yet, she writes. She writes not for recognition, but because the logic must not die. She writes because someone, someday, might find these equations and see more than ink. You offer to help her copy them. She nods. You dip your pen. The ink is thick, and the parchment breathes as you press. Letter by letter, the lines take shape. You realize the future may forget her name, but her mind will live on in the curves of her ratios, the grace of her deductions. But just as you begin the second scroll, a knock at the door. Both of you freeze. She extinguishes the lamp. Darkness. You hear footsteps outside, too firm for a nun. You whisper, "What now?" Her voice is low. Now we see what they do when they realize the smartest mind in the cloister isn't wearing a cassock. She folds the scrolls in silence. You hear the latch begin to shift. Will they find parchment, or proof, ink, or defiance? And the bigger question, when truth and tradition clash, which survives? The door never opened. Or if it did, you don't remember hearing it. What you do remember is the sound of breath being held, yours, hers, and the long, slow minutes where silence was the only defense. When morning came, the scrolls remained hidden, the ink still damp, the truth intact. But that moment never left you. It follows you now into a different chamber. You stand alone, surrounded not by people, but by pages, manuscripts, hundreds of them. You're in a scriptorium, one of the last that still allows access to non-clerics. The walls are lined with shelves so tall, you must climb to reach the upper tiers. The air smells of old leather, dust, and the faint metallic tang of oxidized ink. Light filters through small arched windows, catching motes that drift like slow snow. You run your fingers along the edge of a codex bound in dark calfskin. The cover is plain, but within, secrets. You open it carefully. The parchment is thick and yellowed, crackling at the edge. The script is Carolingian minuscule, elegant, even, precise. And beneath the lines of Latin prose, you see something more. Marginalia. Tiny numbers, symbols, scratched into corners in faded brown ink. They don't match the text. You flip pages. More symbols, spirals, lattices, fractals long before the word existed. You recognize some, ratios, roots, notations for square areas and spiraling proportions. This isn't just philosophy, it's math. You glance to the far end of the room, where a scribe is hunched over a fresh sheet, his quill dancing in rhythm with breath. The scraping sound of feather against parchment mixes with the crackle of a fire and the distant toll of a bell. You return to the manuscript. Near the center, an illustration. Faded gold leaf curls around a diagram of interlocking circles. The circles are labeled, not in Latin, but in Greek, then Arabic. A trilingual manuscript. Rare, dangerous. You turn the page. A folded slip falls out. You unfold it with care. It's newer, less formal, handwritten. A note, perhaps centuries old. Whoever finds this, protect it. The others are already gone. You stop breathing. Others. You scan the surrounding shelves. Some codices are chained. Others bear seals. One, in the far corner, is missing altogether. Only an empty slot remains. The label is still there, etched in iron. Liber X. You feel the room shift. This isn't just preservation, it's concealment. You take another manuscript from the shelf. This one bears bright illuminations, gilded borders, azure pigments, crimson capitals. A work of beauty. The center illustration shows a man holding a measuring rod, standing within a circle inscribed in a square. Vitruvian in essence, but older. Beneath it, in letters so small you must squint. Ratio in everything, but not for everyone. You sit. Your fingers tremble slightly as you turn the next page. There, in columns, equations, proofs, diagrams of planetary motion calculated with mathematical precision that should not exist in this era. But here it is, coded, hidden beneath parables, encrypted in illuminated geometry. And then, a page torn, not missing, torn. The ragged edge suggests violence, urgency. You glance around again. Why would someone deface this? You think of the note. The others are already gone. You imagine a scholar centuries ago rushing to remove what couldn't be allowed to survive. Or perhaps someone seeking to own it alone. You look back at the page. There's a faint imprint of what was once there, enough to suggest it was a formula, one you've never seen. You rub a bit of charcoal over thin parchment and gently press. A shadow emerges, faint lines, digits, symbols unfamiliar. You stop. Footsteps, not the scribe. He's still at his desk. These are heavier, measured. You roll the note and tuck it into your sleeve. Close the manuscript. Return it gently to the shelf. When you turn, a man in darker robes stands near the door. His hands are folded, but his eyes are not gentle. "May I help you find something?" he asks. Your throat is dry. "No," you say. "I've already found what I came for." You walk past him, heart drumming, the note burning against your skin. And as the door closes behind you, a single thought returns. If someone is stealing pages from centuries-old books, what are they trying to keep hidden? And more importantly, who else is searching? You return the manuscript. You left the room. But you didn't leave the question behind. Who else is searching? And what happens when someone learns just enough to lose their way? These thoughts follow you into a different space. a space that hums not with mystery, but with patience. You kneel on the floor of a small schoolroom carved from stone and packed with air that smells of damp parchment and lime dust. A shaft of afternoon light cuts through a narrow window, falling onto the packed sand spread like a carpet across the floor. That sand is where your lesson begins. You're not alone. Across from you, a boy, perhaps 10, sits cross-legged, a reed stylus in hand. He squints at a series of numbers scratched into the grit by the teacher, who kneels just behind him. The teacher, robed in faded wool, taps the ground softly with a thin rod. Again, he says gently. The boy exhales, furrows his brow, and begins to trace. His fingers tremble. You remember when learning felt like that. Not majestic, not dangerous, just hard. The teacher watches. He says nothing, but his eyes, calm, steady, follow every motion. This is no great university, no seat of alchemical secrets. But here, in this humble school attached to a priory, numbers breathe. You glance around. The walls are bare except for a slate board with faded chalk lines. A single candle stubs its wax near a cracked abacus. Beside the door, an open wooden box contains polished stones used for counting. Rounded, smoothed by time and tiny hands. A jar holds charcoal sticks. Nearby, a folded cloth reveals the week's lessons. Multiplication by distributive method, written in the Latin of the Church and translated into the spoken tongue of this region, so every child can understand. That alone, you realize, is revolutionary. Outside, the muffled sounds of life continue. Hooves on stone, bells tolling none. A woman calling for bread. But here, time stretches. The world slows. The teacher speaks again. What is 7 times 8? The boy doesn't answer. Instead, he draws a shaky oval and stares at it like it might hatch something useful. You see the panic rising in him, the frustration, the doubt. The teacher sees it too. He doesn't scold. He leans closer, sweeps the sand smooth, and draws a line of dots. 7 columns, then 8 rows. Slowly, patiently, he taps each intersection. The boy counts. When he reaches 56, his eyes widen. You exhale just a little. You shift your gaze to the shelves behind them. A row of wooden tablets, each etched with rudimentary numerals. Some in Roman style, others in the newer Arabic form. Beneath them, folded parchment guides, stained and torn, used for years, maybe decades. You spot a diagram of the lunar calendar, a rudimentary geometry chart with a circle divided into 6 perfect segments. The computus, a system for calculating Easter, lies rolled beside a small sand clock, half full. The tools are humble, but the minds they shape are not. You remember something you read, how schools like this, born in monastery walls and city guilds, would evolve, how they'd give rise to cathedral schools, then to universities, how knowledge spreads not only through brilliance, but through repetition, through effort, through trying again. The teacher begins to explain square roots, this time drawing a tiny house around the digits. You smile. You used to do that too. But then, you hear it, a breath, not from the child, not from the teacher, from behind the wall. You rise slowly, cross the room. There, etched faintly into the stone, is a mark, a single triangle, the same shape from the manuscript, a symbol, or a message. You trace it with your finger. Dust crumbles beneath your touch, and suddenly the boy beside you drops his stylus. "I can't do it," he whispers. His shoulders hunch. He draws his cloak tighter. You turn. He's crying now, quietly. Not out of pain, but defeat. The teacher kneels beside him and says something you can't hear. You step closer. What did you say to him? You ask. The teacher looks up. I told him that doubt is part of learning, he replies, and that sometimes numbers wait for us. You nod. But deep inside, a different doubt takes root. What happens if a student loses faith, not in the numbers, but in themselves? And what happens if no one is there to help them find the way back? You stand at the edge of a crumbling ruin. The sun warms ancient stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Around you, fragments of marble columns, faded frescoes and scattered scrolls speak of a world long past, but never quite lost. This is where it all began, or so it seems. The wisdom of Euclid, Archimedes, and Pythagoras is scattered here like dust in the wind, but their echoes shape the minds you see in the flickering candlelight of distant monasteries and the bustling study halls of medieval universities. Imagine yourself seated under a wooden beam in a dimly lit scriptorium. The air is thick with the scent of old parchment, beeswax candles, and ink made from oak galls. Around you, monks and scholars pore over texts written in Latin and Greek, translating and interpreting the works of the great thinkers from antiquity. You trace your fingers over the faded lines of Euclid's Elements, feeling the rough texture of the vellum beneath your touch. The geometry laid out on these pages, points, lines, circles, offers a language to describe the world, an invitation to discover order in chaos. Nearby, a scholar debates the method Archimedes used to calculate areas and volumes, wondering how such ideas could help with the construction of grand cathedrals and fortifications. You hear the rustle of pages as another reader studies Pythagorean harmonies, trying to connect numbers with music and the cosmos. Yet, this knowledge is fragile. Wars, religious upheavals, and the slow decay of libraries threaten to erase what has been painstakingly preserved. Many texts survive only because monks copied them laboriously by hand, letter by letter, sometimes in secrecy. You feel the weight of history pressing down, a gap in time, a cultural rupture between the ancient world and the medieval one. Scholars struggle not only with language, but with philosophy, reconciling pagan origins with Christian doctrine. You close your eyes and picture a young student grappling with a newly translated theorem, his brow furrowed as he tries to grasp concepts that originated over a millennium ago. Outside the window, the bell tolls, marking hours and prayers, reminders of a world where faith often overshadowed reason. But here, in these manuscripts and lessons, reason begins to whisper. You wonder, what if these precious works had vanished? What if the knowledge of Euclid's axioms or Archimedes' principles was lost forever? How would the course of science and mathematics have shifted? The question hangs in the air as the candle flickers. And just as you open your eyes, you hear footsteps approaching. A messenger bearing news that could alter the fate of these ancient treasures. Will the heritage of the ancients endure, or will it crumble beneath the weight of time and neglect? You find yourself standing quietly in the cool shadow of a towering Gothic cathedral, its pointed arches and intricate stone tracery casting delicate patterns on the worn cobblestones beneath your feet. The air smells faintly of fresh mortar mixed with the crisp scent of limestone dust and blooming wildflowers from a nearby garden. Your eyes wander upward, tracing the soaring spires that reach for the heavens, seeming to defy gravity itself. Here, in this place of faith and craftsmanship, numbers are not just abstract figures. They are the very foundation of beauty and order. You watch as master masons measure the height of an arch, their fingers pressing against ancient wooden rulers worn smooth from decades of use. The sound of chisels tapping stone punctuates the air, accompanied by whispered prayers and the occasional murmurs of apprentices learning the sacred geometry behind these magnificent structures. You sense that every curve, every line carved into this cathedral follows a hidden rhythm, a secret language of proportions and harmony passed down through generations of artists and mathematicians. The golden ratio, or divine proportion, lingers in the dimensions of the windows and the spacing of columns, offering a visual melody that pleases the eye and calms the soul. Inside, illuminated manuscripts glow softly under the flickering candlelight. You imagine the painstaking work of scribes blending ink and gold leaf to decorate pages with geometric patterns and symbolic designs. Each miniature painting, a delicate balance of color and form, echoes the mathematical principles shaping the world outside. This intimate relationship between mathematics and art is both a marvel and a mystery. While the builders and painters intuitively grasp these patterns, the complex calculations behind them remain elusive to most. You overhear a conversation between a stonecutter and a monk debating whether the precise measurements serve divine will or human ingenuity. As you contemplate the intricate harmony all around, a question surfaces. If most can admire but few truly understand, what happens to this knowledge when those who create and teach it grow silent or disappear? Will the secrets embedded in stone and parchment survive the tides of time? Or will they fade like whispered legends lost to the ages? The answer feels uncertain as shadows lengthen and the last light fades from the stained glass, leaving you to wonder, can art alone safeguard the wisdom of numbers? Or does true preservation require understanding? And so, as the evening bells toll softly in the distance, you are left with a lingering thought. If the harmony of numbers is the key to both beauty and knowledge, what becomes of that key if no one holds it? You find yourself in a bustling merchant's chamber, the air thick with the scent of worn leather, ink, and faint traces of spices from distant lands. The low murmur of haggling voices and the rhythmic scratch of quills against parchment fill the room. You watch as a meticulous clerk, wearing a faded doublet stained from years of use, carefully records sums on a ledger that lies open before him. Each number is a thread in the fabric of a fragile economic web. One misstep could unravel it all. Imagine the cool weight of the quill in your hand, the scratch of ink on rough parchment, and the faint rustle of coins counting out on a wooden table. This is not just bookkeeping, it's survival. Traders in medieval Europe depended on mathematics not only to tally profits, but to build trust with partners and navigate the complex labyrinth of credits, debts, and tariffs. You hear the soft creak of a ledger's binding and the faint scratch of stylus on wax seals, securing contracts that could make or break fortunes. Numbers here are not abstractions. They are lifelines. The use of Arabic numerals, still a novelty for many, begins to revolutionize how merchants conduct business. The introduction of double-entry bookkeeping in Italian city-states like Venice and Florence, where every debit has a matching credit, marks a new era of financial precision. Outside, carts laden with goods clatter over cobblestones. Outside the chamber, the marketplace buzzes with life, merchants shouting, buyers bargaining, horses stamping. But inside, the tension is silent but palpable. The ledger keeper pauses, eyes narrowing over a column of figures. The sums aren't adding up. You can almost taste the rising anxiety. Sweat beads on foreheads. Breaths catch in chests. One missed decimal or misplaced digit could cascade into disaster, jeopardizing ships at sea, warehouses filled with goods, even entire trade routes. The stakes are high. You sense the clerk's hesitation. Should he confess the potential mistake? Or cover it, hoping no one notices? The weight of responsibility presses down like the heat of a summer afternoon, relentless and unforgiving. You imagine the merchant pacing behind the desk, hands clenched, the scent of rich fabrics mingling with tobacco smoke. Words are exchanged in hushed tones. Trust hangs in the balance. The success of ventures, the livelihoods of families, and the fortunes of cities depend on these numbers. The clerk's pen hovers, then scribbles corrections. The figures realign. Relief washes over the room like a cool breeze. But a question lingers. What happens if a similar error goes unnoticed? How fragile is the balance between wealth and ruin in a world that begins to rely so deeply on the power and peril of numbers? The ledger closes with a soft thud, and outside, the world keeps turning. Will the numbers always tell the truth? Or can a simple mistake in the ledger doom an empire? You stand in a grand hall filled with the whispers of change, the scent of fresh parchment mingling with the faint aroma of beeswax candles. Around you, scholars pore over ancient manuscripts, their eyes bright with the promise of discovery. The air hums with a restless energy, a quiet revolution stirring within the walls. This is the dawn of a new era, where medieval mathematics becomes the bedrock for Renaissance brilliance. Imagine tracing your fingers along the spines of leather-bound tomes, feeling the rough texture of parchment that has carried centuries of knowledge. You hear the scratch of quills as scribes copy, translate, and debate, breathing new life into forgotten theorems. The once isolated monastic schools and dusty Arabic texts are now gateways to a broader understanding of the cosmos and human potential. This block reveals how the careful accumulation of medieval mathematical insights, zero's quiet introduction, algebra's blossoming, geometric precision, laid the foundation for thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Fibonacci. The knowledge that seemed arcane and secretive is now unlocking new visions of science and art. But the transition isn't seamless. Traditionalists resist, clinging to old doctrines, while innovators push boundaries, risking reputation and safety. The question lingers in the air like a slow-burning candle. Will the wisdom of the Middle Ages survive the challenges and upheavals of a rapidly changing world? As you step into this moment of transformation, you wonder, can the fragile threads of medieval knowledge weave a fabric strong enough to cloak the dawn of the Renaissance? The hall grows quiet as the candle flickers, shadows dancing on the walls. Outside, the winds of change whisper through the streets. Will this delicate balance hold? Or will the old ways unravel beneath the weight of progress? You find yourself seated by a glowing hearth, the crackle of burning logs mingling with the soft flicker of candlelight. The room is warm, filled with the scent of aged wood and parchment, an atmosphere that invites reflection. Around you, the echoes of centuries whisper tales not of darkness, but of quiet, steadfast illumination that forge the future you now inhabit. Imagine tracing your fingers over the rough grain of a wooden table, worn smooth by countless scholars who wrestled with numbers and shapes long before you were born. You feel the weight of knowledge passed down, layer upon layer, from scribes in monasteries to traders on bustling medieval streets, from secretive alchemists to visionary architects. This legacy, once hidden beneath the veil of time, pulses beneath the surface of today's science and mathematics. This final block weaves together the story of medieval mathematics, not as a forgotten relic, but as a foundation stone. You realize how the quiet persistence of scholars, the brave embrace of new ideas, and the fusion of cultures carried numbers and concepts across boundaries. The zero that once baffled minds, the algebra that cracked open mysteries, the geometric patterns that adorned cathedrals, they all became threads in the tapestry of human progress. You hear the soft murmurs of historians and mathematicians, reminding you that every formula you use, every computation you trust, is part of a grand continuum. The medieval mind, with all its struggles and triumphs, shaped the tools that build your modern world. As your eyes grow heavy, you sense the comforting rhythm of this timeless journey. The past gently folds into the present, preparing you for dreams woven from the same numbers and patterns that once sparked awe and fear. And so you ponder, as the firelight dims, how many other truths lie quietly beneath the surface of history, waiting for you to discover them. The room grows still, the warmth deepens, and you drift softly into sleep, cradled by the legacy of numbers that never truly vanished.